Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for this discussion about the impactful work of our Equine Protection Fund services and the work of our colleagues throughout the state. We're really excited to talk with you about this today. To really appreciate the impact of what we've been doing and the value of the Equine Protection Fund and what we've helped the community with, I think it's important to really first talk about past events that have really led us to where we are today and has prompted the work of the Equine Protection Fund. And then we'll later in the presentation explore some of the things that we know we need to do to further help equines in our state. I think it's helpful actually to start with establishing what we want for equines in New Mexico. I know this is going to sound like a heavy lift, and it is, but that doesn't mean we're not going to aim for it. So our expectation and our goal for equines in our state is to have a humane and robust safety net and to have an expectation of humane equine management be the standard for New Mexico. So we are aiming for both of these things through the creation and implementation of our safety net services through the Equine Protection Fund, and also through our very robust program work. We need to change things like some of the really cruel systems that are in place, like roundup and removal and sale of horses to slaughter for free roaming horses. These are things that are the standard in New Mexico now, and we think those standards need to change. So simply put, we really need a humane and sustainable safety net in New Mexico for equines, just like we have for dogs and cats. And arguably, we aren't there yet even with dogs and cats, but that doesn't mean we don't try. And so these things take time, but that won't dissuade us from aiming for where we want to be. So I want to start by talking about 10 years ago when APNM noticed a significant increase in the cruelty and neglect cases we were getting reported to our cruelty hotline. Horses were being mistreated, they were abandoned, they were left to starve to death. Our data suggested it was more than just a blip, it was a real trend, and we decided we had to do something. So just out of whole cloth, we started the Equine Protection Fund to provide crucial services for equines. And we started with feed assistance and then later moved on from there with veterinary care and gelding. At the same time that we decided to work on these crucial services, conditions in the US were really ripe for having slaughter start up again in our country. For a few years, slaughter plants had been shut down because of congressional action, but there were some things happening that created conditions to allow domestic horse slaughter to start up again. And it was a very frightening time to be an advocate for horses. We were determined to keep fighting against horse slaughter, and instead of horse slaughter as an option and not buying into the false choice of slaughter in Mexico and Canada or slaughter in the US, we decided we want a third option, which is a humane safety net for equines. So we instead pushed for humane approaches for horses through our safety net services, like we started with the Equine Protection Fund and everything it offered. A couple of years later, after starting the EPF, to our horror, we discovered that there were plans underway to open a slaughter plant in Roswell, New Mexico. And so we knew our job was to make sure that would get shut down in its tracks, and at the same time create this alternative and show people these humane services are possible and relevant. So APNM spent the next 4 years fighting against the horse slaughter plant proposal in Roswell, building opposition to the plan from the general public, building opposition to the plan from public officials, and leading newspapers. A poll of New Mexicans showed that 70% opposed horse slaughter and still do. And that was reinforcing our suspicion that the public wants humane options. They don't just want these false choices about where we're actually going to slaughter horses. Nonetheless, despite this public outrage against horse slaughter plants, especially one in New Mexico, plans were gaining steam in our state. And again, it was very scary. Even though there were some setbacks, there were indications from our government that they were going to issue that permit and let that plant open up. In 2013, because of work by our organization to talk with the Attorney General, Gary King, at the time, and persuade him, which didn't take a lot. He's a great horseman from a long time ago. He carried the bill that banned horse slaughter, or I'm sorry, that banned horse tripping in New Mexico in 1995. He filed a lawsuit to stop the horse slaughter plant from opening in Roswell. And at the same time, APNM continued to build opposition to horse slaughter in general and gaining widespread attention for the issue in both local and national media. And one of the things we wanted to emphasize was that there is no such thing as humane horse slaughter. That's really an oxymoron. It would take 4 years, but finally in 2016, a court ruled in favor of AG King's lawsuit, permanently barring that Roswell horse plant from opening. And all the while, we were continuing to build the Equine Protection Fund and the safety net services that it offered, and promoting humane equine care. We also, through our legislative arm, Animal Protection Voters, passed a law creating a state fund, the Horse Shelter Rescue Fund, that and actually creating ways to fund it that supports our licensed horse shelters in New Mexico. So this was really a way of for the first time, having the state financially support those shelters, which are all nonprofits right at the moment. And up until then, there were literally no dollars flowing to the shelters from the state. And the state and the shelters, by the way, are taking in horses in the custody of the state's livestock board. So in the meantime, while all of this work and chaos was going on to try to fight this horse slaughter plant, with it getting shut down finally, in the background, we were still working on these safety net services to prove that these services are a viable option for our community and should be the gold standard. So our services steadily grew, and by 2019, we had helped almost 1,300 equines, keeping these equines with their families and out of the horse slaughter pipeline. So this was impressive work, and this took a lot of time and energy and generosity from our community. You can see we started with helping 100 horses about in 2010, 2011 timeframe, and adding a couple hundred each year, and reaching that total of 1,300 horses helped by 2019. In 2019, APNM began to recognize that free-roaming horses, like those who live on federal lands and on our native nations, are not only some of the most at risk in the state, but they also are suffering in great numbers. So it was clear to us that we had to try to better understand and work to address the issues on federal lands and Native American lands to try to help those horses as well. You can see from the list on your screen what kind of things we're talking about. These are, I'll start by saying, these are problems that have been created over centuries. This is not something that's going to change overnight. These policies and practices have been in place since our country was colonized, basically. And those policies and practices have led to things like seeing horses starving and dying of thirst, something that's really now compounded by climate chaos. This practice of roundup and removal, which is very ineffective. In fact, it's counterproductive, we know from the latest science. It's expensive and then cruel. Horses get sold for slaughter. Whether people tell you they do, they don't, they do. And there's no effective programs for humane population control that our federal government is doing in any meaningful way. Problems have grown worse over the decades and centuries, and these broken systems guarantee that this continued cycle of roundup and removal and shipment to slaughter will be in place until we, the caring people in New Mexico and elsewhere, do something to stop them. As part of our work to dig in on these free-roaming issues, free-roaming horse issues, in 2019, thanks to a powerful partnership with the Rama Navajo chapter, APNM began providing veterinary care and birth control to the chapter's horses. The birth control took the form of gelding for stallions and PZP birth control for mares. It's hard to believe, but prior to our first clinic, we were told that the chapter hadn't had access to equine veterinary services in 5 years. It's a remote chapter, very independent, geographically separate from the rest of the Navajo Nation. And so we were really excited to be able to provide those services. And as you can see through those clinics in 2019, we were able to help dozens of equines, and we were making plans for expanding our impact in 2020. Then in the spring of 2020, COVID-19 changed everything. So since then, as you know, and no one has been unimpacted by this pandemic, it has been causing serious economic harm for families, for businesses, for entire economies. And many families with equines have really been struggling to make ends meet and find ways to pay for feed and care for their equines. So consequently, we've seen requests for feed assistance since March really skyrocket. And you can see on this graph that, we were seeing a steady increase each year, steady being, 100 or 200 horses additionally helped each year. And then all of a sudden, just this dramatic jump in 2020. And this graph, that big bar that shows our total horses helped at over 2,000, almost 2,200, that's just through Q3. That doesn't even count a full year. So this is something we've had to respond to. This is our job. It's what we're here to do. But it has not been a direct path. And it's been something that I'm really proud of our staff and our supporters for helping us address this challenge. The other consequence of COVID has been that the really remarkable work and partnership that we had with Rama Navajo, that work had to stop starting in March when that community was on lockdown. So all of the plans we had for 2020 had to be put on hold. As devastating as the pandemic has been, I would say our community's response has also been outsized. Together, our community has stepped up in really unexpected ways. People are giving money. They're literally donating tons of hay. They're volunteering, and they're refusing to succumb to apathy. We should be really proud of our New Mexico community that cares about all animals and has really stepped up for equines. And if you look at these charts, this is just Q2 comparing 2019 to 2020. In Q2 of 2019, we helped 10 horses with feed assistance. In Q2 2020, we helped almost 900. So think about, that was you'll hear from her later, Victoria Murphy, working on that kind of increase in cases, one person on our staff handling that. It's remarkable. And then, of course, the associated spending with that went up dramatically as well. So total spending for all of our assistants in Q2 in 2019 was about $10,000. In Q2 of 2020, we spent almost $74,000. What was really shocking, I think, in all of this was that there was really virtually no other support for people and their horses needing feed assistance during this pandemic, and there still isn't. Government agencies have been referring people to us, and as I like to say, we are it for people needing help with feed assistance and in many cases gelding. And I really don't know of anyone else providing this. The shelters, of course, are doing their part, but in terms of helping individuals before horses get to the shelter, this Equine Protection Fund is it. APNM's response to help equines has covered vast swaths of our state, and it's included help to individuals, to native communities, and rescue organizations alike. And the number of equines we're helping, it continues to be quite staggering. Given so much uncertainty with COVID-19, we're really trying to brace ourselves for many more months and perhaps years of impact on families and their equines because of COVID-19. This graph reflects only Q2 of this year, and you can see that, you know, we're all over the map, so to speak. And, you know, the light green indicates helping up to 15 horses in that area. The dark green is between 16 and 30 horses in that area. Dark blue is 61 to 90 plus horses in that area. And we even were helping some dogs and cats on one of the, I believe that's San Felipe Pueblo. So the needs are great, and our community has really stepped up. Going back to what our expectation and goal is for equines in New Mexico, while we do everything we can to respond to the tidal wave of immediate needs, we really also have to continue to look at the forces beyond COVID-19 that are hurting equines. We're keeping our eye on establishing sustainable, humane infrastructure. Those are two things that have to happen at the same time, but the work involved in doing both of them is tremendous. What does that look like for us? And I will say that the list we've generated here is just the things we know of right now. We can't anticipate what's going to be needed a year or 5 years from now. All we know is we're devoted to this goal, and we are going to stay on course and react to changing conditions, and keep in mind that we are here for the horses and the people that care about them. So what has to happen next? Really, the basic for the horses themselves is we have to have continued funding for our Equine Protection Fund, particularly feed assistance throughout this pandemic, because the safest place for horses is with their families. And if they are going to be rehomed, we know it's a challenge to find a good home for them. There's a very good chance they're going to be bought by a killer buyer. So we need to try to keep horses in their homes. It's the cheapest option too, by the way. We know we need more gelding clinics, especially in the northwestern part of our state. We need to grow our Equine Protection Fund endowment, and the earnings from that help fund these direct services. This is really recognizing that this work we're doing is going to span years and probably decades, just like some of the other really emblematic programs that we've worked on for chimpanzees, for banning cockfighting. These are really stubborn practices that don't give up easily. So the Equine Protection Fund endowment is a recognition of that, and it's our commitment to stay with this until we wind up where we want to be for horses and donkeys and mules. We will continue to promote donations and ways to fund the state's own horse shelter rescue fund. We are going to pursue state financial support for population control of horses through gelding and PZP. We're going to push for the state establishing horse preserves. This is something that's a new idea, but it's something that we think is viable. We need to continue this powerful work with Raymond Navajo, and we just had a clinic, I believe it was 2 weekends ago, where we provided geldings and veterinary care. So we're back on track a little bit with a lot of COVID-safe practices going on, but we need to keep that work going. We want to explore this PZP work with other Native nations. And we also are looking at growing our New Mexico equine shelter capacity, and we need more trainers and farriers. So that's our, that's our laundry list. That's what we know of now. And we hope that you can help us continue to do this very rewarding and challenging work. So I know I've run over a little bit on my section. I'm going to finish up by saying thank you for participating again. We will take questions at the end. Type them in under Q&A. If you'd like to let us know where you're from, that might help. Maybe we can even talk about some of the services in those areas. So next up, I'm going to be introducing Victoria Murphy, our intrepid equine helpline manager. She's the gal that has handled that just avalanche of cases. We're lucky to have her with us, and Victoria will be telling you some of the stories and things that she's been dealing with since March. Thank you, Victoria.
Hi, everyone. It's been an incredibly busy year for the Equine Protection Fund, and it's been extremely rewarding as well, and very meaningful work to both the people and the equines that we're helping. And I'm happy to share with you some of their stories. Lisa. If you'll advance the next slide. There we go. This photo is of one of our clients, so to speak, Miss Kay Lee, who's a school bus driver down in Doña Ana County in Las Cruces. And Miss Kay Lee is an individual that was already struggling before COVID hit. And problems were amplified because of COVID-19. Her husband was admitted to long-term care, and they experienced some additional expenses, which put a strain on their budget. And they have 4 horses. Then Miss Lee's husband passed away, and since COVID, she found herself with both the loss of her husband's income and reduced hours as a school bus driver while trying to deal with the loss of a spouse. And with all that had been happening in her life, her 4 horses are what kept her sane. And without the help of APNM, she would have been struggling to feed her 4-legged equines. And no doubt Miss Kay would have maybe not picked up her own medication and not fed herself as well, so that she could take care of her horses. Her horses are Handyman, which you see in the photo, and she also has Sunny, Rain, and Moon. Next. This client is Sheldon Crispin and his family, and they live on the San Felipe Pueblo. Interesting story with Mr. Crispin is I received a call from him, and he was recently released from the hospital and was still recovering from COVID-19 himself. He was under stay-at-home orders, and he had a friend who was feeding his horses, and he was almost out of feed. And when he was hospitalized, he reportedly did not sleep for 5 days because he was afraid to close his eyes for fear that he would not wake up. He was sedated the other 2 days because he was wearing himself out worrying about it and worrying about his horses. So Mr. Crispin told me that he's only 44 years old and he felt like he was 80-something. And this lifted a tremendous weight off his shoulders, knowing that his horses, which are family pets, would be safe, would be fed while he's recovering. And they are doing well. He is doing well. Next. The next story I'll tell you a little bit about is from the Morgan family. Mr. Morgan's grandmother died of COVID-19, and he reportedly said they had been forced to sometimes sell livestock in order to feed the remaining livestock. However, their horses were very important to them. They have 12 horses, and the horses originally were slated to go to slaughter. And his father cared deeply for the horses, and he took them all in and trained them so that they would have a purpose, so they would be useful. And they all are ridden as family riding horses and for trail riding. And otherwise they would have maybe not still been here today. This family suffered a lot of loss already, and they did not want to suffer any further loss because they've already suffered family members being lost, and they wanted their family members to have a good outcome as well as the horses. The interesting thing with him is horses were equal to the family in how he wanted to make sure that they were all cared for and not below the family. The other surprising case, we have many cases, as you might imagine, was a rural journalist who said she was struggling because not as many people are advertising as previously had been, and not as many people were needing her services. So she found herself with a limited income, and she had rescued 3 horses. 2 are pictured here, Mama, Boy, and Chica, and they had all been abused and neglected, and she took them in to provide them a better home. And now she's found herself in a situation where she herself is struggling. She had never gotten any assistance before, had never asked, and was so appreciative of even 30 days worth of help to hopefully help her get back on her feet. So these are just a few of the stories of some of the people that we have directly provided assistance to and their horses. Next. One of the other efforts that we endeavored in is communities like Navajo Nations are being quarantined or had stay-at-home orders, and they're unable to leave to go get supplies or go to work. And this photo shows or depicts some donated semi-loads of feed that we received. We had a volunteer driver that helped drive the hay to the location where we saw the most need, and volunteers that helped with the distribution process. And this made a tremendous impact in these communities. So we did a community-wide delivery of feed assistance, and we had a remarkable response due to the volunteerism all the way around, the volunteer of the hay, the driver, and the laborers to help unload and distribute the hay. Next. So some of the things that we learned when we're doing this program is that we're not just providing feed assistance, we're providing hope, and we are providing trust, which had been severed many times before with a lot of folks that had called asking for help, but not sure that they would get it. And we're providing them with support that they actually need. We are providing them with something good is happening in all the negativity that's occurring in today's time. And the good is maintaining the family unity between them and their pets, whether it's in the Native Nations or elsewhere. We're providing that to these communities all around the state of New Mexico. As you see in that second bullet, a lot of people didn't believe that the help was really going to be forthcoming, that it was a false hope. And people have burst into tears and expressed the sheer gratitude of receiving the feed assistance for their pets. This takes the feeding of the equines out of the equation so people can focus on their families, which are also very important, and we want to help them too. We are not only helping feed horses or equines, but we're also helping conserve the land, which is impacted by the overgrazing. Many of the animals that are on the Navajo Nations are put out to graze when they don't have the resources, like now when they can't go get supplies. And with providing the feed resource, the equines are then be able to be fed the feed they need, and the land can regenerate and regrow. And hopefully with some rain, it will hopefully happen sooner than later. But this is also impacting conservation. We're also helping limit the equine reproduction that isn't sustainable through gelding and PZP. Part of the program is that we do, if somebody is actively breeding, we do help with the gelding services so that does not continue, and that we're making an impact in each family that we're helping with that as well. For the Ramajo Navajo chapter, we're not only helping stabilize the community, but we're providing food boxes for families as well as feed assistance to multiple families in that area. And that'll probably help them throughout the rest of this year. So not only are we helping feed the equines, but we're helping feed the families of those equines as well. So some of the things that were discovered is that there are some significant ongoing needs. Obviously, we realize there are a lot more stallions out there than we originally anticipated, and the veterinary care services in some areas is non-existent or difficult to access. Many individuals don't have trailers to be able to transport their equines for services, and so they rely on maybe more traditional means of self-care. We also learned we needed to streamline the process. Some people didn't have internet and they couldn't go online to access our online application, which we had created with COVID so that people didn't have to go to the library, print out an application, fill it out, and mail it in. But that even still didn't answer all of the barriers. So we've continued to adjust and grow this program as we've learned there were needs to meet the needs of folks that had no computers or internet access. I'll take the application over the phone, fill it out for them. They send me their photos of their animals and the proof of ownership, and we make it happen regardless. So we're meeting all those needs. And we seem to be the only answer for this particular problem right now. People are desperate, and people, these problems and stories are real, and it's affecting people that you wouldn't imagine that it would affect. And without our help, they wouldn't know what to do. We have people that say, normally I would put my horses out, but I don't want to do that. They'll disappear. They're afraid that they'll be sold off for money because money is tight and money's hard to come by if they're forced to not leave home and not go to work. So we are determined to make a difference for both those families and their equines and do all we can to meet the needs and address all of these discoveries as they are discovered to continue to make a difference. So as the person who's taking the calls, I want you to know, those of you out there that are attending this session and those that might be hearing this afterwards, that it does matter. What you do matters, and what we do matters, and what we do couldn't be done without your help. And these folks that are receiving the assistance are truly grateful and appreciative. And many of these photos that are sent through by individuals that we're assisting are with their families, photos that show them spending time with their equines, just like you might at home with your dog. These animals mean a lot to a lot of individuals, and I'm afraid for what would happen to them if we weren't here to help them. So we are so very grateful to our community that has helped us continue to protect equines at the level that we have been doing it and continue to do. So thank you. I want to remind you, if you have any questions, to please type them in under the Q&A, and we'll be happy to answer them at the end. Now I would like to introduce Debbie Coburn, who is the founder and COO of the Four Corners Equine Rescue. Debbie?
Hello, everyone. This is Debbie with Four Corners Equine Rescue. Thank you so much for joining today to hear about what we can do to help the horses in New Mexico. I am the founder and COO of Four Corners Equine Rescue. We have been in existence for the last 16 years. We're a 501c3. We are located in the northwestern corner of New Mexico, just outside of Aztec. Most people can figure out where we are. We're about 30 miles south of Durango, Colorado. In the 16 years that we've been here, we've rescued almost 450 horses. In 2012, some of the rescues in the state of New Mexico banded together to work as a group so that we would have more impact. We had a couple of requirements from groups in order to join. One was that they had to be in New Mexico. Another was that they had to be registered with the New Mexico Livestock Board, and they had to be a 501c3. There are, I know, many rescues in the state, but there are only 10 that work with the Livestock Board. So NMERA was formed, which is the New Mexico Equine Rescue Alliance. I am one of the co-chairs, with Susan Hemmerly from the horse shelter being the other. In 2019, NMERA formed an agreement with the New Mexico Livestock Board in an attempt to get some sanity into the process of what happened to the horses that the New Mexico Livestock Board took in. And so we agreed that they agreed to give the rescues first right of refusal on all the horses that were taken up as strays. But in order for us to get that, we had to commit to taking all of the horses, all of the equines, strayed by the New Mexico Livestock Board. And we have managed to fulfill our commitment with the New Mexico Livestock Board. I think in 2019, the Livestock Board strayed 42 horses, and the equine rescues got all of the ones that weren't returned to owners. So we were successful in our endeavor. This year, just last month actually, there was a problem with a permittee of a grazing allotment by SIBO, and the horses there, and there are plenty of these types of horses all over the state. They were on federal land. The permittee there, of course, didn't want them on there. There wasn't enough water even for the cattle, much less the horses. So he trapped all the horses using a water hole as a trap. Well, then that's 16 horses that were free roaming, and now where do they go? Well, because BLM does not recognize them, therefore they have no protection under the Wild Horse and Burro Act. So they go to the Livestock Board, and these are wild horses. In a collaborative effort, all 16 of these horses were placed in New Mexico rescues, but it illustrates the challenges for us as a group, even with 10 rescues, to take in 16 wild horses is a challenge. The two you see on the photo are the two that came here to FCER. So this little mare here is named Bella. She's one of the 16 horses we took in, and this wound on her lip illustrates the need for a safe way to deal with all of with these horses. They are wild, and therefore they require really good fencing and a way to handle them, to vet them without having to have them haltered because they can't be touched and that sort of thing. So, you know, I know the Livestock Board is strapped to find places that can even hold 16 wild horses. That's even while they go through the 5-day mandatory holding process, while an owner is looked for theoretically, but in their case there's no owner, and you know, it's pretty much a done deal. Rescues have to accept these horses with limited information from photos and descriptions. We don't go get to see them or anything, put a hand on them, nothing. Resource and time commitment is required. So the challenge with these horses, the biggest thing is that if an untrained domestic horse starts training at a 0, then a free roaming wild horse starts at a -10. And it takes months just to get them to 0, just to move them forward. So how do we do it? How do we go from the mare on the left to the mare on the right, same mare, about 2 years later? And the answer is teamwork, all of us. We all have to play a part. The problems associated with free roaming horses are the result of generations of policies and practices. We can't fix everything overnight. We must work together this year, next year, and the years after that. It will take smart, dedicated people and resources to make New Mexico a safe place for horses. We're working on it. We're all willing to work on it, but we need more help. If you have any more questions, just write them down in the Q&A section, and I think that's what's coming up next.
Okay, thank you, Victoria and Debbie, for those awesome presentations. And we have a couple of questions in the question and answer box. Someone wrote in and said, besides donations, what can individuals do to assist equines and their owners? So that's a great question. I think right now, one of the big issues is having resources, again, to feed horses. So if, you know, we can't all just give away all our money to horses, but, you know, we can encourage other people to support these efforts. If we have relationships with people in other communities to help provide maybe donations of hay. We've gotten a massive donation of hay from a feed grower in Roswell, another one from northern New Mexico. So if you know anyone in the agriculture community that could help with this, that would be great. I think also just becoming active and engaged with the work that Animal Protection of New Mexico and the shelters are doing together on the policy side of things. So we're trying to stop the tidal wave and the damage from the individual cases. But again, these COVID-19 aside, there were problems before COVID-19, and that was the result of bad practices and policies. And so helping to support the policy work that we do at the state legislature and that we do with the Livestock Board and other agencies like BLM and Forest Service, being our collective voice to address these issues and to demand change in how horses are treated under these circumstances. The next question is, could one of us explain a little more in a little more detail our vision for horse preserves? And I'll take a stab at that, and then I may ask Debbie Coburn to weigh in as well. You know, again, I think I said we're establishing this vision for horses. I don't think we have all the answers, but I think one thing is clear from what Debbie just described with the free roaming horses that were taken in, that just those 16 from the BLM allotment, it typically takes 2 years from bringing in a horse to a shelter that's free roaming and having them available for adoption. That takes a tremendous amount of resources. And so collectively, we've started to talk about the idea of making land available for free roaming horses to let them live out their lives. That, you know, that may be a more cost-effective solution for some of these animals who just never will get beyond -10 in Debbie's scoring. So Debbie, did you want to add anything to that? I don't know if Debbie is muted and doesn't know it, or anyway, we'll Debbie, there you are. Debbie, did you want to add something to that about the horse preserves and just the challenges with the free roaming horses?
Well, one of the things that happens is, especially as the horses get older, the less responsive they are to being domesticated. And there are what I call the hard nuts to crack. And I have 4 of them here, and these are horses that are so untouchable that you know, there's no option other than what from my position would be to turn them loose and let them live out their life. They're not going to be domesticated, and there are horses like that. The other thing to remember as far as bringing in horses is when you bring in a mare and she's got a foal, you can bet she's got another one just waiting for next year to pop out. So you're literally having your weight, you have to wait for the first foal. You can work with the foal. Then the mare's already pregnant. You know, I don't adopt out pregnant mares. I don't think any of the rescues do. So then the next year you have another mare. So you're going to keep that mare for a year, over a year, just so that she can have her baby. So that's an issue too.
Do we have any other questions? I think, I don't know if, Jacqueline, you asked the question about the preserves, if that answered your question, or if you have other things you wanted us to address. Again, you know, asking the state to establish preserves could take the shape of something like a state park. These aren't things that we have figured out in every detail right now, but I think what we do know is that the status quo is broken for horses, and we are doing our very best to address the conditions on the ground at the moment. And, you know, these ideas are things that have to be fleshed out more fully. But certainly horse preserves are something that work in other areas. There's horse preserves on the East Coast, Chincoteague and Assateague are a couple of examples. So, you know, we're going to be looking to other areas for some ideas for some of these things that we'd like to see put in place in our state.
And Lisa, I just wanted to pop back on to see, we have an additional question in the chat regarding PZP. So Jesse wants to know, can we explain more about PZP? Does it have to be administered every year?
Okay, so thank you for that question. I'm not a PZP expert, so I'm going to take my best shot at this. My understanding is that the most research we have on the efficacy or effectiveness of PZP birth control is based on the 1-year vaccine, which means that the vaccine has to be given a first year and then an additional booster. And then I believe for a couple of times after that. The science is still developing on this. There is another PZP vaccine that is being experimented on, that people are experimenting with, that would not require an annual booster. Again, I think the efficacy is still being studied. What I have heard, and again, for the really detailed information about this, I think I would refer you to our staff person, Laura Bonner, who's not on this call right now, but she would have the most information about this. But, you know, the science, I think, suggests that after a certain number of years, you actually can stop giving the vaccine and the mare will no longer be able to become pregnant. But again, this is something where the work on PZP in New Mexico is actually hopefully going to contribute to this body of research that we need done to see what is the most effective way to apply PZP and how can it make a difference on the ground. That's what really matters. And it's not just a matter of darting a horse and walking away. You have to document the horse with photos and markings, and a lot of times these are horses that are untouchable, so it's done with a special tool that can do it from a distance. These things have been perfected actually by an expert living right here, excuse me, in New Mexico. So we're fortunate, we've got the resources, the subject matter expert resources here in New Mexico, but we need to do more of this. And of course, COVID-19 helped put the brakes on the work that we were doing at RAMA, and we hope to be able to resume that soon. There's another question. What type of public input do you need to begin the process of opening preserves in the vein of Chincoteague? That's a great question. So well, again, I would just encourage you, anyone who's interested in being part of this conversation and part of this advocacy, to sign up for our e-alerts, stay engaged with us. We haven't even started exploring this idea of preserves. This is just our laundry list and our to-do list for the next umpteen years. But we will definitely want public input on that. We'll want the public to weigh in and say why this is valuable. And I think that it's arguable that there would even be at a time when people are moving about the country again, when something like that could be an attraction. Our state is inviting outdoor recreation in a way that it never has done before. There's no reason why free roaming horse preserve couldn't be part of something like that to generate interest and inspiration for horses from people all over the world, really. We have about 6 minutes, I noticed. I wonder if there's anyone else that has questions or comments or any other thoughts about horse work in New Mexico.
Lisa, there is actually another question. If you look down, I can read it for you.
Oh, I got it. Thank you. Just popped up on my screen. Thank you. I think there's a little delay from maybe Dorte, your headquarters, to my computer. So the next question is from Cara. When you work with Native nations, do you maintain partnerships with animal control, livestock departments, or tribal councils? Who are your indigenous partners and what kind of requests are you hearing from Native nations? So that's a great question. I don't think there's any kind of, there's no one size fits all. Right now, our deepest experience is with the Rama Navajo chapter. And in that case, we are working with their natural resources department. We've got some very dedicated people and very compassionate people working in that department, helping us all along the way to understand their needs and the challenges in that community. To my knowledge, I can't answer whether they've involved a tribal council or not. I know Rama Navajo has always been very creative and very independent. So my suspicion is that the Navajo Tribal Council has not had to be involved in that. With other Native nations, maybe that's the case. We have explored, you saw on Victoria's presentation, that big truckload of feed that was going to the Taos Pueblo. And in that case, I believe the person that we were interfacing with was had to do with their more human services department and serving their elders and other needy members of the community. So the Native nations, I think you've probably heard, are ground zero. They were early on for COVID, just emphasizing the lack of infrastructure that folks have for running water, electricity, the centuries of policies that have caused outsized unemployment and poverty in those areas. So the needs there are tremendous. And that's why engaging with those communities is a big part of what we plan to be doing in the future. And then there's another question from Jacqueline. What was the outcome of House Bill 218 in 2019? If passed, has that had significant impact? So that's a great question too. House Bill 218 was a bill that we have been working on. It was actually passed. I can't remember which year it was. I think it was 2017, and it was vetoed by former Governor Martinez. That bill would have put into state statute the requirement that any horses in the custody of the State Livestock Board would first be offered to the equine shelters. And that would apply to not just estrays, but those taken in under the cruelty statute. So horses that come to them from cruelty cases and estrays, all of them, no matter the source, the shelters would have access to them. Because right now the state statute mandates that horses in their custody that come to them through cruelty cases have to be sold at auction. or have to be offered at auction. And so the shelters end up competing with kill buyers, and that's a terrible system. And the Livestock Board supported changing that, but the bill was vetoed. We tried again in 2019. That bill died waiting for a vote on the House floor. It had not even gotten crossed over to the Senate. So in the meantime, the good news is because the Livestock Board liked that idea, knowing it served their interest, it served the public's interest in the humane treatment of equines, they worked with us to establish this internal process, but it can literally only apply to estrays because the state law is clear in its mandate that the other horses through cruelty cases must be put up for auction. So we still have some work to do on that at the state legislature.
So with that, I would like to thank Lisa, Victoria, and Debbie for providing us with such incredibly interesting and valuable information. So you've enriched my life, and hopefully everyone else's too. So thank you, everyone, for taking the time to be here with us today, and I hope you all have a great evening. Off to the horses.